Hello, and welcome to my first commentated art process video. Today I'm going to be walking you through one of my current design processes, and to do so, I'm going to be redesigning one of my old characters, Yusai Rin. To begin with, I start off by creating some kind of holistic vision for myself. This comes in the form of a brief. I know that I don't want to stick to any of the stuff in the old designs. They're too streetwear-y, too modern day inspired for my fantasy tastes now. There's not that much that strikes me in any of these old designs, so I'm not going to be tying myself to keeping any of the elements within these designs. So the first part of the brief, that is probably the most important part because it drives everything, is that this is a fantasy character, which already confines us a lot in terms of design. Secondly, she's an elementalist with the affinity for the tranquil element. In my world, the elements are a little bit different than the standard Greek fire, water, earth, air, even the Chinese wood and metal. The tranquil element encapsulates things like water and ice, but also encapsulates air and ether and liquid. So the elements in my world are a little bit more esoteric concepts rather than these hard forces in the world, but they do encapsulate some of the forces. So moving on in the brief, we've got where she comes from. She comes from a cold climate. And during this time, I realized that a character who has control over, ice, for example, like the cold, and a cold climate character, they're different things. Just because someone has ice magic doesn't automatically presuppose that they come from a colder climate. This is something, though, that you see constantly in fantasy, that an ice character has to be from the coldest region in the world just because. That being said, even though they are two distinct things, I did decide to go with the fact that she is someone who can control ice and stuff, and she is also from a cold climate. So I'd like to do my due diligence here and explain why I did this, because I just mentioned that people just do it just because. And the reason I wanted to do it in the end is because this character I want to be, in essence, kind of a statement of how one could design a cold character, and we don't have to make it a blue character with ice armor all over them, wielding some Nordic axe with a bunch of blue tattoos all over them, and long blonde hair, braids, beard, tons and tons of furs. I want to create a character that is from a cold region with ice powers that doesn't fall into the same category of characters that you see time and time and time again. I just wanted to point that out for anyone who's designing a character. Just because your character can control earth and stone doesn't mean that they have to live in the mountains. Unless your magic system is specifically designed that way, if it's just magic that anyone can pick up, there is no reason why they need to be living in the exact climate of their element to have picked it up. You can see some notes about her culture and how she would dress. I'm not going to repeat it. There's no reason she has to be blue. If you look at the generic side of my references, when you zoom out, that whole collage of images blends into a blue mess. And it's just ice means blue, water means blue, and so everything has to be extremely distinctly blue. If you look at real life cold climates like Russia and parts of Mongolia and stuff like that, look at their outfits. Do they dress in blue attire? No. Why would they need to? So it's just it's a visual shorthand for the entertainment industry. And I feel there's no need to follow that thing just because it's the thing that is done. We're mature enough in this age of the entertainment industry that we don't have to just follow the cliche norms ad nauseum. And here I've got her personality, which will help me kind of design her face, her expression, and her posing as well. Like things like her anatomical base that will reinforce the design that we draw on top of it. And then finally we have these real-world cultural inspirations, because I think it's quite important to pull from things that exist in the world. There's no need to reinvent the wheel and make up crazy fantasy clothes. We stand on the shoulders of giants. There are so many eras with great clothing and armor that you can pull from that is both aesthetically pleasing and functional. And I think as a concept artist, it behooves one to study these things, to try and learn from and incorporate into your own fantastical designs. I'm not trying to suggest that we just copy things that have been done before and all fantasy characters have to dress as if they existed in real life. But for my tastes, I enjoy creating something that retains some modicum of verisimilitude. So after the brief, I gather references. This specific board encapsulates what I want to see and things I don't want to see. I don't have a specific system for how I create these reference boards, and sometimes I don't even have reference boards, I just have images. But I wanted to illustrate how I would go about gathering references for this piece. Okay, let's get to drawing. So I'm doing the pose now, and something that I was thinking is some wide open pose to show that she's inviting and friendly and stuff. So it's almost like she's gesturing for a hug, something like that. But it can also be seen as some kind of confident, strong, where she's kind of like, bring it on. With this first design, I really liked that reference with the woman with a half fur mantle and half silk or fabric. And I really like the different color distribution. It's quite bold and it kind of bisects her. So that's the first thing I started with. Usually when I start a process and I gather a bunch of references, I gravitate towards one idea that I'm like very, very clear on how I'm going to begin it. And all it takes for me at the moment is just getting something on the page. It doesn't really matter how good or bad it is at this point. It will be a jumping off point for everything else. Just getting my brain thinking about shape design, the visual aesthetic language that I'm going for with the character goes a long way. Even if I don't think it's going to be a good design, or I think it's generic or whatever else, if I have something that's very clear in my mind, that's the first one I do. Just get the ideas on the page. So I meshed this Mongolian fur silk kind of idea with some of the Turkish princess uniform ideas that I have in my reference sheet. So now I'm just going to talk about general design principles that I think about during this process that you see on screen. I think that's more useful than narrating the specific choices I make here, because I can't exactly give you a definitive logical reason for why I do the things that I do, but they all come under this umbrella of theory. This video is not supposed to explain to you the theories in depth, otherwise this video would be multiple hours long. It's to serve as like a jumping off point if you haven't heard these terms before, or if you know them but you don't know their relevance to design. I urge you to go away and listen to videos or read some material on these theories and fundamentals. Here I'm breaking up the clothes with some subdivisions, and I'm just taking inspiration from some of my references as for the shape design and the shape language of these subdivisions. And the subdivisions here are intended to break up the larger overall silhouette shape. And so if you've heard of the concept of big, medium, small, which is talked about often in concept art as well, because it's design, and it is about distributing shapes in a certain hierarchy that we have found to be appealing to humans. And it's to do with the golden ratio and contrast and hierarchy, priority. These things are psychologically ingrained into us. The essence of what I'm doing here is subdividing the big shape to add layers or levels of detail to the design. So it's not just one big blank canvas. There's spots of visual interest that are created by the medium subdivisions, and then areas of high detail would be filigree and pattern design, and those would be the small of the design. And it's important that we leave a big area in the overall silhouette, so we have contrast between areas of detail in the design and areas that the viewer can rest. And so an idea for this in your character design could be that the face is a big focal point and detail probably abundant in the face because it's very important. You spend a lot of time on it. And then maybe just below the face, you have an area of rest, like a big mantle, for example, where you don't have patterning on the mantle or anything like that. It's just a big blocky shape. So that doesn't detract from the detail of the face. Another idea is that your areas of rest, your bigs, in the big, medium, small hierarchy are places that the viewer is going to snap to first. They're going to look there, and or the face. But if these two things are side by side and you have the face and an area of rest or like a big shape near it, then the eyes will snap to that region first. So with this design, I went for a more classic Inuit look where she's got thicker clothing, a beefier silhouette. Yusa is a more defensive user of her magics. She's less aggressive, and so this bulkier look reinforces that kind of feel. I also personally wanted to do a design that was chunkier in nature because I often default to things that taper, so designs that maybe start off big and then taper around the ankles and or the wrists, and so I wanted to try something new. I'm going to take this opportunity now to talk about asymmetry. The two designs on the screen currently, the one on the left is very, very asymmetrical, whereas the one on the right is gearing to be very symmetrical. There's a lot of theoretical ideas when it comes to asymmetry, i.e. asymmetry can give the feeling of sturdiness, health, balance, reliability, order, whereas something that's asymmetrical evokes feelings of chaos, dynamism, and relaxation. But asymmetry also can be used to draw attention to things. If something is perfectly balanced, then it's hard to know where to look. You can kind of envision that if both halves are the same, then which half do you look at, and does it even matter? But with asymmetry, it draws your attention to the side that has more chaos on it, for example, more detail. And this will go into an idea about contrast, which I might talk about later. But visual contrast is very important for us humans. Our eye is drawn to contrast, and it's not just a contrast of colors, it's a contrast of everything. It's a contrast of shapes, it's a contrast of flow, it's a contrast of light, it's a contrast of color. And so the contrast of detail versus no detail is also something that draws our eye. And so asymmetry can add detail to one half, which draws you in. But I think it's very important when we're designing fictional characters, for example, to create some modicum of asymmetry. We want some small spike of chaos. Again, that idea of if both halves are the same, then you're good enough looking at only one of the halves. Creating a little bit of asymmetry even gives that little pop to the design, a little bit of extra kick to it. And in my opinion, it also functionally feels more natural. So for example, like the way they wear their necklace, or the way like a rope is slung over the shoulder, or the way their belt is hanging. It doesn't need to be perfectly symmetrical, and that kind of perfect symmetry is extremely uncommon in nature. Of course, we design our clothes like that today. Like a t-shirt, for example, is pretty symmetrical, but even sometimes you'll add a pocket to a t-shirt on one side to create some asymmetrical detail, or the logo only on one side of the chest. But I think overall, the way that things fall on the body, the way that things are at rest on the body and the clothes, like a fur mantle, for example, it would be extremely unnatural for this fur mantle to look the same on both sides. But also, I'm hyping up asymmetry a lot here, but there is a lot to say about symmetry and why it has a lot of value. For one, if we take the t-shirt example again, most of our modern day clothes are symmetrical, and it's because they're very functional. So we embellish it maybe with a tiny bit of asymmetry here and there, like a logo on one side. It would be weird to add a logo on both sides of the chest. You'll have logo nipples. Armor, for example, it's very common in the gaming industry, at least, that fantasy characters are designed with one massive pauldron. But if you think about how that would function in real life, it's oftentimes extremely dysfunctional. So you're trying to design a proficient sword master, and you give them this giant pauldron on one arm. The idea is really cool, and they're trying to create visual interest with asymmetry, but you ultimately end up with a master swordsman who is wearing armor that is completely counter-conducive to what they really want, which is to be nimble and able with their sword. As concept artists, we also need to find this balance between how much asymmetry we include and how much symmetry we include. And so oftentimes when I go with asymmetry, it is using materials that are not so weighty and would hinder the character's balance and agility. But I don't always stick to it, and sometimes, even though these theories and fundamentals and rules are in place, you as an artist are free to break them at your discretion. So here I'm using lines to create the contours of the silhouette of the character. At the current moment, I flip between two processes. One being designing with lines, and the other being designing with paint or value. I think for this piece, the reason I went with lines is because I had a very clear vision of what I was going to start with. I knew the exact objects that I was going to be drawing. Like I said earlier, I really wanted to get that initial design down based on the reference, and so I had a very clear direction, and so defining it with lines immediately gets me closer to that finished result, which is going to be clean line work. But I would say that currently in my art journey, I'm leaning more towards the painterly process. So I'm going to put it on the screen for a moment and talk about that process, but you also might have seen me just doing it with the headpieces. I wanted something quick to see the direction for later. So with the painting process, maybe I have less of a clear idea in my head of the actual materials, the folds and where the clothes tuck in and whatnot. And so it's more about playing with shapes rather than defining the exact things I want to see. I find that using paint allows me to see a more solid shape on the anatomy, and I can detail rough design elements into it very, very quickly by erasing. for example. And then the main thing is that I can very quickly change the shape of the overall design. So like, let's just say shoulder armor. I can quickly mock it up with paint and then change the shape of it very quickly. I can like add a spike here and there, or like change the overall size very quickly and the way the pauldron curves. Whereas with lines, to change the shape takes a lot longer because you have to redraw that element again after erasing it. And again, not being able to see the form so clearly with the lines, it kind of does this thing to your brain where you can't fully tell the weight and size that this thing takes up until you suddenly put value underneath the lines. So I think in general, drawing new shapes and erasing and stuff like that takes a lot longer than just carving things out with paint. I also find that a byproduct of using paint is that I can get a lot of faux detail very quickly in the artifacts that are unpainted. So like the contrast between the light and shadow. So where I miss a spot with the painting, that becomes an artifact. And all these artifacts add up over time to give the piece detail. I'm also not using a full opaque brush, and so the transparency also gives this level of texture where I've painted over something a little bit more than in another area, and the value contrast creates detail. And then I can also very quickly make areas darker than others because the brush is transparent, and I can get an inclination of shadow. And so you get a faux rendered look very quickly. So the piece starts looking more finished and more detailed more quickly. Whereas with lines, you would have to go in and actually draw in the detail, which again just takes a lot longer. So this painting process, I use it a lot to save time. So just going back to the topic of asymmetry real quick, one of the things that I started with this outfit was the 2 to 3 previous designs have a lot of symmetry in them, and so I wanted to return to what I started with in the first one, which is a very big differential in the symmetry of the outfit. And so very quickly I come up with the idea to give her this big sleeve on one arm and then a more tapered look on the other. And perhaps by this stage in the concepting, like I mentioned before, getting ideas down onto the page like helps me generate ideas, and like, you know, maybe I get out a bad idea here and there, but there's something in each idea that I'm gravitating towards. And so with this outfit, you get kind of the bigger shapes from the Inuit design on one side, and then the tapered look from some of the other designs on the other arm. And so we're starting to get a more holistic idea of where this is going. And then to tie in another concept, the contrast of detail. Since our arms are two distinct shapes, the asymmetry created serves to draw the viewer's attention to the chaos, and it almost kind of creates this triangular pattern from her outstretched arms pointing upwards to her head. And you can see that the way that the treatment of the pants are done are such that they're symmetrical, there's not much chaos going on, and there's a lot less detail in the trousers than the torso. So we've already mentioned the chaos of the asymmetry of the arms, but also in that V that is created in her torso, there's a lot of detail created there, a lot of small detail, which are things like her necklace and like pendants and tassels. Whereas the trousers don't have much of that same detail. Again, it's about drawing the viewer's attention to where you want to draw it, which is the top half of the character, nearer to the face. So you may have seen on the outfits I've designed so far that I supplement the line work with some faded value. The reason I do that is I'm creating an extra level of contrast design and shape design. So instead of it being the form and the contour and the silhouette for the shape design, it's the interior lights versus darks. And we're designing the shape distribution of the lights versus the darks. And I can design these shapes in service of the focal points. So for example, in the interest of drawing the viewer's eye to the head, I already have the value of the head because I know her skin tone and her hair color. So once those values are established, it can serve as a jumping off point for how the other values in the outfit should be distributed. And I just use one flat value in many cases. Usually it's the same value in color as I'm using to draw the lines, just saving time again. And so the complexity of this value structure is simply the value present and the value not present. But even this two-tone structure can quickly give you a sense of the hierarchy of import. It doesn't take very long to do, and it goes a long way to defining the final look. Sometimes if I get a sense that adding values is adding a lot to the concept, as in getting close to the finished product, I will introduce a third value as well to add more dimension and complexity to get it that much closer to the final vision. So with this outfit, we can see that as we tend away from the torso and the head values, we get a lot more simple, such as like the skirt area and the flaps over the skirt and then the trousers. They all share the same value, which creates a continuous shape throughout the design. Now, if we were to turn these lines off, the delineation between the items of clothing would disappear, and we would be left with blocks of value. So although there's a lot of detail in terms of the lines and the folds in the trousers and the subdivisions in the trousers and the design on the skirt, the value helps crunch all these details together. And then if you look at everything above, there's a lot more contrast in the value distribution, which serves to draw the viewer's eye. And it would also do you good to ask yourself, what is this character about? What is important to this character? So for example, if I was designing a character that was all about their legs, as in they kicked a lot, or their power came from their legs or something like that, then you would maybe flip this idea and have the detail in the legs, whereas the torso is a lot more barren. So from here, I'm going to be less detailed on the commentary. I've spoken about general overarching principles already that guide most of the design process, so it's just more of that from here on out. For the next two concepts, I focused on more militaristic, heavier, armored designs. There were some military inspirations in the references that I gathered, and so I wanted to at least try some of that, even though Yusai is not really a militaristic character. So I ended up deciding to go with the third design that I did, and I could feel myself leaning in that direction even here. But I wanted to continue with the ideas that I had in my mind, because things were starting to feel like they were getting going, and there were some ideas that I really wanted to get out, specifically the militaristic things that I was talking about earlier. I wanted to at least try one of them. But I also had a very strong idea about trying a Russian soldier suit. And although it doesn't really fit her character like I mentioned, I can still use these concepts in the future because I'm building out a world to inform the visual stylings of the culture that she comes from. But sometimes it's just good to get out these ideas that you have in your head for a character so that you can see it and then be convinced that that is not the direction you want to go. So these are all the variations that I decide to do, and like I said, I select number 3 and then I move forward to coloring. One thing that I did in this process, which is not my usual process, was I photo bashed some of the references into the outfit, because I was thinking we're not doing that light blue shade that I ranted about in the beginning, and I mentioned how many places that exist in cold climates don't use this blue when they dress, and so I was just thinking, why not just use the references whole cloth? And I'm honestly really happy with the results and how quickly I was able to get some colors down there, and also adding some detail along with it and interesting patterns. It all just seemed to like work out when I tried it, and that's great, so I might be doing this more often now. As for the colors themselves, there's not much to talk about other than that I was trying to stay away from a light blue, ice kind of feel. I was also keeping in mind the value distribution that I had set up earlier. You'll see here that I add a satchel and a belt and a dagger. I was thinking that she looked a bit plain or bare, and I was thinking to add shapes around her, things that she carries. She's a nomad, so I can imagine that she's got like a hunting knife or whatnot and a bag to carry her things in. These things are more on the functional side of design. I don't think she needed them per se, but it helps tell more of a story with the character. But I also like the shapes breaking out of the silhouette that I have. I think they're quite interesting. But as for a concept itself, like in a fighting game or a hero shooter or something, she really didn't need the bag or the dagger to be a solid design. So here I'm just cleaning up lines. There's nothing much to talk about. I could talk about lines for a long time, but that isn't this video. So now I'm doing a back view of the character. This is useful for if you imagine this to be a concept for a game, like a video game for example, then you can imagine that to help the production process as a concept artist, you're going to be handing it off to the 3D artist next. And so having more views for the 3D artist aids them in their ability to create this character in 3-dimensional space. Then I do some expressions to fill out the character sheet layout and make it more visually appealing to look at. I also include some of the headdresses I was concepting earlier to expand the exploration of the character within the sheet. So here she is. This is the finished concept, and I'm pretty happy with how she turned out. This is, I think, the best she's ever looked, and I mean, one would hope that that is the case. So I wanted to do something at the end of this process, which is slap Yusai in the middle of the generic part of my references to see if she blends in when I zoom out. And I think it's safe to say that she doesn't. So we at least held to that part of the brief, which I'm pretty happy about. So that brings us to the end of this process. I covered some of what I think about when I'm doing concept art for characters, and I hope it was somewhat insightful for you. Like I said earlier in the video, this video is just an insight into my thought process, so I briefly gloss over some of the principles that I'm thinking about. I encourage you, if you want to understand more about the principles that I bring up, to do research of your own. There are lots of videos out there, lots of books, lots of articles on these topics. I could in the future make videos that touch on these topics, like my thoughts on them, but this video was just supposed to introduce how I think when I do a character design. There's also this layout that I did, which is an entire topic unto itself, but for now I hope you enjoyed the video and some of my rambles, and I hope you got something out of it. So with that being said, until next time.
At the moment, I flip. At the current moment, I flip between two.